right. Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I am Julia Farrar. I'm head of digital literacy initiatives at the University Libraries at Virginia Tech, and I am an affiliated faculty member with the Media Education Lab. I am super excited to hear from Violet Fox today, who is coming to us from Northwestern and sharing some ways of questioning, thinking about generative AI through zine making. Really excited to dig into this topic with you all today. A couple quick logistics, things to expect. We are recording today, and the recording will be available through the lab's website and YouTube channel. We are not using any AI bots or other note taking from the Zoom AI. We are going to be hearing from Violet for the first part of our hour together, and then she will be walking us through some prompts to get a little taste of zine making ourselves. And then we'll all have a quick chance to share a little bit in small groups about what we start to work on before we wrap up together, just to give you a sense of where we're headed. If you are joining us from a service desk or otherwise not able to unmute, we are still happy to have you. Please feel free to engage in whatever ways you are able to. And with that, I will turn it over to Violet to further introduce her work and dive us into this great topic.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Julia. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you so much for the invitation. This is delightful and a little bit scary, and I'll talk about why it's scary. So yeah, questioning generative AI through zine making. And I appreciate so much the invitation to talk about both of these things that I'm very passionate about. So about me, so as Julia mentioned, I'm at Northwestern University in Chicago. I am a librarian at the Gulcher Health Sciences Library, so I'm in the medical school library at Northwestern. And I am a cataloging and metadata librarian. So I am generally someone who talks about cataloging in presentations. I talk about classification and cataloging a lot. I've had some pretty interesting roles, including at one point I was one of the editors of the Dewey Decimal Classification. So I have a lot of interesting things to say about cataloging and usually talk about cataloging. And so this is a new presentation for me, something that I'm not 100% confident about. I've practiced quite a bit, but I've also changed it up a lot. So we'll see how this presentation goes. I'm really excited to have you all with me. Thank you so much for joining us today. So to talk about today's presentation, so I'm just going to talk at you for a little while, hopefully not too long, about 15-20 minutes. What I think is going to be the second best part of this is the zine making demo. So sort of showing you how to make a zine, sort of getting you having some physical thing in your hand to sort of process some thoughts that you might have. And so having these guided questions, I think that's going to be the second best part of the presentation today. And I think the first best part is going to be the breakout rooms. I'm really excited about the sort of people who would come to a presentation about questioning AI through zine making. And I hope that you all are excited too to talk to each other and sort of make those connections. I think they're increasingly vital in a time where, so many structures around us feeling like they're falling apart. And I think this is not a topic that a lot of people feel encouraged to, sort of question or, have those sort of bigger, deeper thoughts about. So I'm really excited about the breakout room conversations. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to end up by resource sharing if anybody has ideas about, or, great resources that they'd like to share. And of course, the Q&A session to further talk about what you talked about in the breakout rooms and any other questions that you might have about AI or zines or anything that came to mind during your conversations. So some helpful tools for today. If you'd like to join me in making a zine, and I hope you will, all you'll need is one sheet of paper, just a normal sheet of paper. It can have stuff, it should be blank, hopefully. I'm hoping you have some sort of pen or pencil with you, marker's fine, anything to write with. And it'd be really helpful if you had a pair of scissors around. If you don't, you can make a little tear, and that's going to be just fine. But those are going to be the things that will help you out today in terms of our zine making experience. So I'm hoping folks have those around, and if not, just go grab them at some point. All right. So with that, I'm going to actually shift a little bit, and I'm going to do a poll. We're going to do a word cloud, and I want you to talk about your thoughts about AI. So I put it in the chat, a link to the uh, word cloud that I'm hoping people will respond to. And I'd like to hear just one word that you might have about your feelings about AI. Hater. That's creepy. Yeah. Curious, scared, bad. Yeah, and I think this allows you to do multiple submissions. So feel free to put in if you have other words. Happy to hear it. Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. There's a lot going on, right? Excited, annoyed, theft, tired, hesitant, nervous, conflicted, climate crisis. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So everywhere, and I think everywhere is a great exhausted, I think is coming up multiple times, but I think everywhere is a thing to sort of focus on, that it's sort of inescapable at this point. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, about how I think that it's sort of sucking up a lot of oxygen in the room of things that, like we could be talking about other things, and yet we're here talking about AI, even though we're all sort of not all, but many of us are exhausted or, unnerved by it. But some people are excited about it. So I'm really excited to hear those folks, their thoughts on that as well. So let me go back to the presentation. So I'm just going to talk about, oops, slideshow. Okay, so I'm going to talk about what this presentation isn't. So it's not a beginner's guide to AI. I'm not an expert. I don't have any thoughts about how you should get started working with AI. And I also am not going to talk about how to use AI at your library. You'll hear more about my thoughts about AI. I don't think you should be using AI at your library, so I'm not going to share tips and tricks about that. There's lots of other resources if you're looking for that, though. This presentation also is not a debate about whether we should use AI. I'm really happy for your thoughts, even if they don't align with mine. It's just, this isn't going to be the place for that. I really encourage you to host your own webinar where you talk about whether we should or not. So let's talk about what this presentation is today. So it is informed by an AI resistance perspective. That's my perspective. That is, of course, not the only perspective, and it's definitely not a common perspective, especially in librarianship right now. So I'm hoping that this presentation has some new ideas for you because of that. It's also, this presentation is, the zine-making part of it is a huge part of it for me, and it's an introduction to the power of zines. And hopefully folks are familiar with zines. I'll talk a little bit more about what they are and what they can do. But I'm hoping that if you don't know a lot about zines, that this sort of whets your interest and that you are able to explore and investigate a little bit more. Finally, this presentation is a chance to think about what AI means to you. I talk a lot about how our professional values are, something that we talk about a lot in librarianship. And then in my, in the things I've talked about, I've talked about how I don't necessarily think that AI is reflective of our professional values. But I'd like you to think for yourself personally what AI means to you professionally and personally. All right, so first off, I'll talk about, I just mentioned AI rejection as a perspective. So what is AI rejection? And of course, I'm going to use the example of like a bad AI here, where I Googled what is AI rejection, and AI rejection refers to when a job application, resume, or candidate profile is automatically rejected by an AI-powered system, often used in recruitment, not due to not meeting the AI's predefined criteria or failing to match the system's expectations. So that's very bad. That seems bad. Like that seems like something people should talk about. That's not what I'm talking about here. So thanks AI, you failed on that one, but let's try another one. So let's try what is AI resistance. Let's try that slight definition change here and see what Google AI has to say about that. First of all, it's really trying to get me to ask about what is error resistance. It really, like all of the Google results were talking about error resistance, which was Okay, and then but the AI overview does have somewhat a little bit closer to what I'm getting at here. So AI resistance in the context of artificial intelligence, of course, refers to employees' reluctance or unwillingness to adopt, engage with, and work alongside AI systems in the workplace, often stemming from fear, perceived inefficacy, or a preference for human interaction. So lots to pick apart in this overview, of course. So I'm thinking about AI resistance not just as an employee, not just as a librarian, but as a human being, as someone who's a creative person who has very, like intense uh, thoughts about what sort of values and how we can make the world a better place. I'll just say that. And so I would sort of critique all of this last part of it where it says often stemming from fear. I don't have fear. I don't have fear. It's I have other concerns. Perceived inefficacy. I'm not concerned that AI isn't efficient enough. That's not definitely not my concern. Or a preference for human interaction. And I'll tell you, as a cataloger and an introvert, I don't necessarily love human interaction. If computers were doing something really spectacular, I wouldn't be mad at it just for the sake of being mad. But so I really have some issues with this AI overview of what AI resistance is. So let's trash it. Let's think about something. So I'll talk today. So let's back up a little bit and just do what is a generative AI definition. And there's lots of definitions to take that we can choose from. I'm going to choose this IBM research one from April 2023, where it says that generative AI refers to deep learning models that can generate high quality text, images, and other content based on the data they were trained on. I really appreciate that this definition talks about being based on the data that it's being trained on, because so much of, like the entirety of what this AI is generating is based on that data. And I like that it's not using the word create or any sort of wording that sort of gives it more credence than it should have. So I could maybe quibble with the idea that it's generating high quality text and images and data. Like high quality compared to what? Probably compared to the machine learning that was happening before the breakthroughs in generative AI. But this is probably good enough for us for today. And so I will talk about why I'm here today. I'm not an expert, but I did write a zine that people sort of seemed to it sort of seemed to resonate with folks, and so that's why I'm here today. And I talk about it as the zine I didn't want to write. So the title is A Librarian Against AI, or I Think AI Should Leave. And I really it was sort of a hate-driven zine. It was I kept hearing about AI in the last over the past year and a half, and sort of saw librarianship really embracing it in a pretty uncritical way. I went to a lot of workshops and a lot of presentations, and there were presentations that were being given that sort of said, well, there's a lot of ethical issues, and then just sort of ramshod over that. Like they said, well, there's all these concerns, but we're still going to use it, and this is how we're going to use it. And so I really had some problems with that, and sort of this zine was sort of created out of this idea that we have a responsibility to our professional values and to our ethical frameworks as human beings to sort of be more critical of AI than I think a lot of the presentations have been. So let me, in case you haven't had a chance to read it, it is available freely online, but I will just summarize some of the points just in case you haven't had a chance to read it yet. So I talk about, I use the ALA Code of Ethics as a starting point. Now we know that not everyone is, there's no oath that people are taking to, abide by the ALA Code of Ethics. It's not like the Hippocratic Oath or something. But it is a starting point for us to talk about our professional ethics. And I think that I talk about in the zine about how I think that there are many things that the use of AI is doing that are against the ALA code of ethics, such as we have this idea that we are supposed to provide accurate and unbiased information, and in many cases AI is not doing that. I just saw a article about a study that was done that showed about 60% of citations from generative AI had false information. So that's not great. Um, there's always talk about how it's going to get better, but for right now, it's 60% is oof, that's a really bad number to be giving people. And they were saying the study said that the paid versions actually did worse in terms of accuracy and that sort of thing. So other things that I think the use of AI, sort of is not in keeping with our code of ethics, things about ensuring privacy and confidentiality. I think the companies that are working with data, uh, the generative AI companies are not necessarily concerned about privacy or confidentiality in a way that we should be, and should be ensuring that the vendors that we're working with are also ensuring that privacy and confidentiality. So there's a lot going on with that, and respecting intellectual property rights. That's a big thing for librarians. And that is not something that the people who are running AI companies are interested in or think that is a valuable thing. So that's been interesting that librarians in general have sort of been not so sad about sort of waving away the intellectual property rights of the people who are being of the internet sites that are being scraped in order to provide the data for these generative AI tools. Also, dismantling systemic and individual biases. This is something that we say in the ALA Code of Ethics that we have strong feelings about, but that is not necessarily something that the use of AI is going to promote or think is something that is a valuable value to have. So I go on in the zine to talk about some other key points beyond just the ALA Code of Ethics. I talk a lot about the significant environmental impact. And this is something, again, that I think we do a lot of in the presentations I've been to. I think have a lot of hand waving of like, yes, of course it has environmental impacts that are very bad. Anyway, we should talk about this other thing. And so, no, really, we actually have a responsibility to think about the environmental impacts. They're pretty significant, and they're in addition to the already unsustainable environmental impacts that our society has, that are not helping with the climate crisis. So I think we really do need to look at that and not just sort of hand wave that off again. Thinking about lack of transparency and data that these programs were trained on, it's really hard to know what these tools are scraping because in most cases it's a closed environment, it's opaque. And that, again, I think is something librarians should care about. And also thinking about eroding critical literacy skills within closed environments. And so some of the UX, the user experience choices that are made within these tools, such as, for example, ChatGPT, are to maybe provide sources, maybe not. But when they do provide sources, it's not necessarily something that you would really click on. Like as a human, you would just see like a footnote and be like, okay, well, I'm probably not going to click on that footnote. So that sort of thing really erodes critical literacy skills within these AI environments. So those are the things I talked about in the zine. And then there's some things that, I wrote this back in, what was it, October last year, November, something like that. And these are points that I should have made in the zine and I didn't, but not necessarily that the zine had to be complete, right? And I'm hoping to get that across too. So things about the impact of content moderation on exploited labor. So content moderation helps ensure that we are not seeing horrific, terrible messages and images on our social media and our generative AI output. But the downside of that is that there are people who are having to see those horrific messages. I actually worked as a content moderator, and I didn't have necessarily the same experience that people in these more exploited labor in other countries are having, but I did see my fair share of beheadings and child pornography, and it really rots your soul. So there's a big impact of that we're not seeing, and so that's significant with the AI that we should take into account. Somebody's doing that work, and it's not good. There's opportunity costs, as I mentioned before. There's opportunity costs associated with AI taking so much of our time and money and energy. Um, all the problems that we have within librarianship and within our society in general have not gone away, and we're still, but now we're sort of talking about AI instead of sort of addressing some of those issues and living our lives. So that's a bummer that so much of librarianship now is talking about AI and what we're going to do with AI. I would argue that AI increases wealth condensation, this idea that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer through these AI companies that are making this money. And so I won't get too much into it, but that's an argument that definitely has been made. And I would also argue that there are many use cases for those who are inclined towards fascism, which if we had a fascist president, it'd be pretty bad. They'd be maybe laying off a bunch of people in the federal government using AI tools. Oh, wait, that's what they're doing. So it's not great. There's lots of connections between AI and fascism. You may or may not, find those compelling. I find especially the fact that so many people who are inclined towards fascism use AI art as a way to get their message across, really sort of compelling. So I'd love for you to explore those if you haven't heard that sort of anymore. So now that I've got myself all riled up, sort of angry about things, I'm going to talk about something I actually want to talk about, which is a zine. And why did I make a zine about this? I could have just written off a blog post, and that would have been fine. I could have made a tweet thread or a Blue Sky post, right? A couple of posts about it. But instead, I made it a zine, and that is because I have such faith in what zines can do. So zines are small self-published works that can be really about anything, but they generally have in common they're not necessarily made for profit. And they're also sort of generally seen as passion projects. People write them because they're very passionate about a specific topic. They're not necessarily doing that, making a zine for work usually. Sometimes they might make it for a class or something. But generally it's people are passionate, they want to get their art out, they want to get their message out, and they create a zine about it. When I talk about zines, I think some of the best ways to say what is a zine is just to show people what it could look like. And here's some of my zines just to give you a sense of some of the range that we're talking about. So first up, I have my porch goose zine where I did some in-depth research about the phenomenon of what a porch goose is. And this is my mother-in-law's porch goose, and I did a little case study and a lot of photos of her porch goose. Another zine that I made is this one here. It's this little mini zine. It's called $93,605, and that's the current balance of my student loan debt. So obviously something I feel very passionate about, and something that I wanted to sort of, connect a huge number to a face, which is mine, right? And maybe tell it in a way that is compelling to people so they have some sort of sense of what it's like to have that much debt. I also made a zine pretty recently called Connecting with Our Radical History and Cataloging, where I talk about, obviously, the radical history of cataloging, and hopefully it's something that a lot of librarians don't know about. Radical books that artists log. I put this up and had a lot of leftist book recommendations for newly radical folks. So it's a reading list of 17 books that I think people might be interested in. I created a zine about why I edit Wikipedia. A lot of people are like, oh, that's they're pretty interested in hearing why I edit and not necessarily understanding why I would spend that time doing it. So I wrote a zine about it. And then I recently, this is my most recent zine, 11 Reasons Why I'm Still Wearing a Mask in 2025. Again, something I'm very passionate about, and a lot of people don't necessarily understand where I'm coming from, so I wrote a zine about it. So this is a lot like the Portlandia sketch, if people know the sketch where they put a bird on it. They go into a hipster store and they make everything slightly more hipster because they put a bird on it. And so I essentially make a zine out of that. When I have strong feelings or passions or that sort of thing, my immediate response is to make a zine out of it. I don't know if that's healthy. I should probably just get a therapist, but I do feel like this is slightly more constructive than, say, journaling. Um, or lots of other, or just chatting with my friends, because there is something that you physically that you can share. I think there's something really to say about that physicality of it. And it is somewhat of a catharsis to be able to share that, to both write it down and to share it in a way that I hope is helpful to people. So some of the reasons that you might make a zine is that through zines, we can share our passions. I think this idea of being passionate about something and enough to share with other folks is a huge part of the zine idea. We can promote discussion. I've had a couple of people tell me that, they had a staff conversation based on my zine, and that it provided a perspective that they hadn't heard before. And I know that there was actually an ACRL discussion, like a discussion group about they did their book club on my zine, and I'm like, I really wanted to go because I was like, oh, I'm gonna go, but I didn't go because it would be creepy. I don't know if I showed up and didn't, and I was like, yeah, talk about my zine, because then I'd probably feel a little constrained about what they could say. So through zines, we can spark creativity. So it's not just that I'm creating these zines, it's also that I'm putting this out there, and hopefully other people look at my zines and say, well, I can do that, or I could do better than that. I'm hoping that I, have enough like sort of crummy examples of zines that I can help people say, I can actually create as well. I'm not just I'm not just someone who takes in media, I'm a creator as well. And I also think that zines we can inspire activism. I think there's a lot of really great examples going around right now of some of the activism that people are being educated and sort of sharing ideas about what people can do, instead of just feeling sort of helpless in a moment where a lot of us are feeling sort of in crisis. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so that we can make a zine together. This is zine's part. So take your sheet of paper. Let's go. I know it's going to be tempting to just watch me do it and not necessarily do it yourself. But I really do encourage you to get this physicality, the physicality of it, and like actually make a zine with me. So I'm gonna put my screen down so you can see here. And the first fold that we make is well, when we're talking with kids, we're talking with kids, we talk about it as a hot dog fold, because we do it lengthwise along the paper, just fold it in half lengthwise. And once you're done doing that, it looks like a hot dog bun. So that's why we call it a hot dog fold. All right, so once you've done it lengthwise, you're gonna unfold it and fold it in half the otherwise, which we call a hamburger fold. So just fold it in half. So now you've got a sheet that's in quarters. And at this point, you're going to keep it folded in half, and you're going to fold it again like this. So it'll be in quarters. I'll make that again so that you can see it. So you've got this half size, and then you're going to fold it over like that. All right. Hopefully that's okay for folks. So we've got this sheet of paper that's now folded in quarters size. So this is the little bit tricky part, and where you need your scissors, or you can just make a tear. So now that we've got it in quarter size, I've got a line here of where we were going to actually make a cut. Make one cut in the paper. And I'm going to cut right across here, halfway through where this line is. That allows us to unfold this into a mini zine. So hopefully you can make that cut. That look okay? Anybody stuck? Feeling good? Great, perfect. All right, now you're gonna unfold it. You're gonna fold it again, that not hot dog style, that lengthwise style. And if you'll see, this is sort of folding into a little diamond shape here. So you're gonna smush it together, and you're gonna make a little booklet that looks sort of like this. Okay. It's the folds might not naturally come, so you might have to do double folds, like, fold it and refold it. But by the end, you'll have this little booklet that looks like this. And you've got they call it an 8-page mini zine or a one-sheet mini zine. And here's one that looks like that is finished, so that you can kind of see what it looks like. So it's got a cover, it's got these inside pages, it's got three main spreads, and then it's got a back cover. So that's what your mini zine looks like. So hopefully that was okay. If you were not able to follow along, that's totally fine. Um, because there's lots of tutorials online to help you figure out what a mini page, when a one-page zine looks like. So there's lots of templates online that you can print one out, that there's like a line where the scissors should go. So yeah, one tutorial. Thanks so much, Julie. I appreciate that. Like there's lots of great tutorials and there's videos online. So don't let that get you stuck if you weren't able to follow along just like this second. So now we've got a mini zine. And if you weren't able to do a mini zine, just a piece of paper is going to be just fine. So don't worry about the details here. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Uh, and we're going to do a little bit of reflection here. So I'm going to give you some questions to answer. So for me, the cover is always like coming up with a title is really hard. So I'm going to have you flip to the inside first, and we're going to do the cover last. So this inside has two spreads of pages, so you've got plenty of room to answer this first question. And what are some words or images that describe your feelings around AI? So just like what we did with the survey, I'd like you to fill out these first two pages with some words or images that describe your feelings around AI. I'm gonna do some emojis because I'm not a good drawer, so. All right, I'm gonna give you another 20 seconds or so. Just write some words or images that describe your feelings around AI. Doodles are great. Okay. Hopefully you've got a good start. I've got some sort of junky little, just some little words here. So, maybe, curious, concern, some anxiety, little worried face, a little worried emoji, a little furrowed brow. All right, let's move on to the next spread here. There's another 2 pages, and I would love you to write about what are your hopes around AI. Again, images or text are great. All right, it's another 20, 30 seconds. All right, some things about your hopes around AI. Great. Well, thanks so much. I've got a little rainbow, and I have an idea that the bubble bursts and that we can use it in ways that make sense and aren't sort of assuming that it will fix everything and will have to be everywhere, right? I also have some other things about that it fades into the background or that it goes the way of Bitcoin or, well, I guess what's blockchain or something that I don't ever have to hear about it again, or at least less so. Finally, I'd like you to turn to this last page, and I'd like you to write, what are your fears around AI? All right, just another 20 or 30 seconds. All right, well, thank you so much. Um, one of my fears is that it takes up energy and money that could be used elsewhere. And I drew a little drawing of a tornado, just feels a little bit on the destructive side, and that it's a little bit, yeah, that it's just sort of there's a lot of destruction happening. So those are some fears that I have. So with the rest of your booklet, so what I would think that you could do on the back is put your name and a date, because I'm a cataloger, so I want everyone to date their publications so that it's cataloging is easier. It's terrible. You can't take the cataloger out of the woman. It's terrible. So put your name and date or whatever you feel like on the back, or if you have further thoughts that you'd like to explore. And then flip it around to the front and think about what you might want to title this zine now that you've got some content in there. Sorry, content. You know, you could be like AI and me. You could have like a little flower of like, investigations into AI, or you could call it Satan's tool or whatever, like whatever you want to do. Like really just however you're feeling at this point. Give it a little title, make a little image. All right. Great. So I'm calling mine Explorations into AI. I don't want to, totally say that it's, that this zine is 100% negative. It's not. So, well, with that, I hope that you'll be able to, this is a starting point for you. And now I'm hoping that we can go into the breakout rooms, and that you'll be interested in talking with the folks who are here. Again, I think it's going to be a really interesting crew who are here. I'm hoping that you'll be able to introduce yourselves, your name, where you're located, and I hope that you'll want to show off your zines. You talk about whether you've made zines before. What does your zine look like? I think other people are going to be interested. And then chat about AI. How much have you used AI? Have you heard of AI resistance? Are these totally new ideas, or is this right in line what you're thinking, or is this totally not what you're on board with? So, what do you think? I'm excited to hear about the conversations in the breakout rooms. Julia?
Yes, I am going to open up 3 rooms and we'll take about 10 minutes to chat and then we'll come back and debrief a little bit and have a little bit of time for Q&A. So, yes, enjoy the opportunity to connect and introduce yourselves and chat a little bit more. Rooms should be open now.
Okay, I'm gonna duck into the room too.
Perfect.
Thing with zines, I mean, and you know that it's let everybody. I want everyone to make their own zine. Will be so excited if someone makes their own AI zine. I will be so excited if someone makes their own porch goose zine, for crying out loud. Like I just want everybody's perspectives to be out there, and to be able to tap into that creative spark that we have, and to say, like, this is what my perspective, this is what I'm thinking. So I really I'm really so excited to see other zines happen in this area, and in other areas of librarianship, especially. Delightful to hear this stuff. Yeah. Leah, oh, I love your future about your feelings about there might be a Leah says there might be a zine about my future about in my future about AI and my feelings about it as a hard of hearing person. And I think that's 100% valid, totally exciting to hear. I'd love to hear your zine. I'd love to see your zine happen. Thank you. We've only got about 5 minutes. Any other questions or any other thoughts about zines, about AI? I'd love to hear them.
Violet, the thing that I find difficult about zines is that they can be hard. I mean, because they're self-published, like, how do people find them? Do they usually get distributed through like social media, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question, and there's a lot of stuff. So I actually was just at a Zine Fest this on Saturday, the St. Cloud, Minnesota Zine Fest. So there was about 30 or 40 zinesters selling their art, and lots of trades, lots of swaps happening, lots of great conversations. A lot of So I also share my zines. Most of them are freely online. People can print them, just like Julie has their site that has all their zines on it. And so I have mine so that people can either read it online for accessibility reasons, to have accessible PDFs, but then also to have it printable. And so it's important for me to get them out that way. And so usually I share them via social media. Um, there's a lot of there's on like on Blue Sky, I have a whole stream of people who are just mentioning the word zine, and so I get to see a bunch of different zines from people that I don't know. Um, Etsy is also a really good place. There's a site called Itch.io. I don't know how to say it, and I've never said it out loud. Where people post their zines. Yes, thank you, Julie. And so there's a lot of really great options to put it online. But also, it can be like those old chick tracks that you would just find one on the bus, and you just spread it out, and you put some at the laundromat, you put some at the library. You never know where it's going to show up. So it's one of those things where if you keep a lookout for them, they pop up. And I'm hoping that I'm not going to ACRL this year, but I'm hoping that there'll be a zine swap at ACRL that I can crash. So pretty much any place where people are, like for example, a library conference at ALA where the Zine Pavilion is. I'm hoping that people will feel inspired to create zines and swap them there.
Liz, I just got into zines maybe like last year or 2 years ago. I can't remember. And I didn't know there were Zine Fest in town, like as many in my area. But there was one I had heard of. I didn't know what zines were exactly, but I was like, that looked like a cool thing. But it was on hiatus until the year that I was interested, which was great. So if you just look up like a Zine Fest, you'll find hopefully something in your area, but it does take some kind of just general community building work. I think just that's my experience. You're gonna have to like see one person on social media and they'll like share the zine fest that are happening around, and And then also, and I'm saying this to myself too, you might have to host the zine making thing or the swap. And then people might come to you and you'll be like, I didn't know you were into this. And then like this webinar. So
Yeah, once you are tapped into sort of a network, it can be there's a lot going on. But it can be a little bit hard to find out in advance for sure.
Thank you all so much for sharing. I think how much human and humanity is in this conversation and in this approach. And that feels like a way forward to me, is that we can continue to have these critical conversations, reflective conversations, and also make things ourselves. And that feels like at least one thing we can do. So thank you again, Violet, so much for leading us in this. And this webinar is part of a series on leadership in libraries for digital and media literacy. So I invite you all to be part of that in lots of continued ways. One is that we have 2 more sessions scheduled for this semester. And so on April 23rd, we will have digital literacy and fandom culture. And on May 14th, we'll have privacy literacy. And if this has sparked things for you and you would be interested in sharing in the future, please reach out to me. I hope to continue this series. And also feel free to reach out about engagement with the Media Education Lab in general. We've got lots of webinars coming up on lots of different topics. So please keep in touch, and thank you again all for being here.